Lord, let your light of your face shine on us.
I want to talk today about an encounter that Jesus has with his apostles and a question that he asked them about who do you say that I am, a question about his identity. And I think sometimes, we think of that as a pretty surface issue. That's not too difficult. That's not too complex. Who is Jesus? But in reality, I think it's a very important, it's significant, it's a foundational question for our lives. And it's not a question once for a lifetime. It's a question pretty much every day, all day long. We need to hear the Lord saying to us, who am I? Who am I to you? What is my identity? What is my place in your life? And sometimes identity can get confused. There can be confusion. Many years ago, a couple of guys wrote a book called Children's Letters to God. And I don't know if you ever saw that, but I think the first one appeared in the 1960s, and then there were several since. But they were just honest little statements and questions that children sent to God. And I want to just share a few of my favorites with you today. Dear God, this is Marla, age 6. Do you get your angels to do all the work? Mommy says we are her angels and we have to do everything. Right? Well, that's a valid question. Maybe the other angels do too. This is Larry, age 7. Dear God, maybe Cain and Abel wouldn't kill each other so much if they had their own rooms. It works with me and my brother. So there's a guy offering some sage parenting advice to the Almighty there. Well, maybe you could try this with your kids. This is Anita, age 8. Is it true my father won't get into heaven if he uses his bowling words in the house? Well, that's a good question. Barbara, dear God, do good people have to die young? I heard my mommy say that. I am not always good. And I like that, right? She's like, well, if good people have to die young, then just remember, I'm not always good, right? Not always good. Dear God, this is Joyce, thank you for the baby brother, but what I prayed for was a puppy. Right? And voice that with the complaint department in heaven. Dear God, Raphael says, if you give me a genie lamp like Aladdin, I will give you anything you want except my money or my chess set. He's hedging his bets. And then Nan says this, did you really mean do unto others as they do unto you? Because if you did, I'm going to get my brother. How about that? Sometimes we can be confused, just like the kids. I mean, it's easy to be confused about what God wants from us sometimes. And sometimes I think we even purposely confuse ourselves. But sometimes we can miss the point. And the disciples were good at missing the point in the scriptures. We want to talk today about a day where Jesus said, well, what is the point of who am I to you? Who do you say that I am? Now, I get lonely really easy. Do you get lonely easily? So when I read, I gave you the things here. Can we read this together so I'm not lonely? Because I love it when I hear God's family read the scriptures together. So let's read this passage together. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, who do people say that I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked, who do you say that I am? Peter answered, you are the Christ. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Now, they've been on an amazing adventure. I mean, the Gospel of Mark just reads like this action-packed, one major event, one miracle after another, over and over. They'd see the blind receive their sight. They'd seen those who were deaf able to hear. They'd seen people raised from the dead. They'd seen multitudes fed with a couple of sardines and some dinner rolls. They'd seen amazing things. Their world had been turned upside down by this incredible adventure, walking by the side of God himself, God incarnate, Jesus with them. And they'd been on this great, amazing adventure. And then he takes a handful of his disciples 25 miles northeast of the Sea of Galilee at Caesarea Philippi. And that name, we probably know more about Lawton, don't we, than we know about Caesarea Philippi. That city doesn't sound familiar to us, Caesarea Philippi. but it was a familiar place to the people in Jesus' day. It was known as the city of temples. There were no fewer than 14 temples erected to the idol Baal in the city of Caesarea Philippi. And there was one giant monstrosity of a white marble temple erected to Caesar Augustus. And in the shadow of those monuments, Jesus leans across to a handful of followers. And in the midst of those monuments to these false gods, he says, Who do people say that I am? And they said, well, some people say you're John the Baptist. Some people say you're Elijah. Other people say you're one of the prophets. And he says, well, this is not really a Gallup poll. Who do you say that I am? Right? Then he says, well, what about you? What about you personally? Who do you say that I am? And then there's Peter's answer. Let's read it in Matthew, because it's interesting. Well, his answer is, we just read it, right? But what about you? Who do you say that I am? He said, you are the Christ. He says, you are the Christ. In Matthew, let's look at what it says, or I didn't give you what it says in Matthew. But he says literally there, in the Greek it says, you are the Christ, the Son of the God, the living one. Don't you love that? That's how Matthew renders it. In the Greek it says, you are the Christ, the Son of the God, the living one. And then Jesus hears that answer, and then let's read Matthew 16:17. Here's his response. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. Now that's great, isn't it? Peter's got to feel great about himself there. It's like, hey, listen, this is amazing, Peter. You didn't learn that from people. You didn't learn that in school. That's not something people could have taught you. You've been listening to God himself. Well, that's quite a little pat on the head for a student, right? That's a pretty good pat on the head. In UCLA, there was a pre-Enlightenment philosophy class a few years ago, and the professor gave a final, and the final was just this: one single question and 20 blank pages to write on. And the question was, what is courage? And so some of the students feverishly writing, filling those 20 pages for 3 hours with all they knew about pre-Enlightenment philosophy and what it had to say about courage. Except for one student who in under a minute finished his paper, turned it in, and it had 2 words on it. What is courage? This is. That's what it said. This is courage. The professor loved it, gave him an A+, got him up in front of the crowd, said, oh, this guy, he got it. That's a moment like Peter has. He is the star pupil. He's answered the question that he could only have heard from God himself. Just imagine how he feels. And then Jesus goes a step further and says, okay, well, let's talk about what that means. You say I am the Christ, the Son of the God, the living one. Then let's talk about what it means. Because the way that question's answered, who do you say that I am? The way we answer that question every day has some impacts in our life. Number one, let's look at there. You've got your blank. Number one, my answer to this question impacts the source of my identity. When I answer the question, who do you say that I am? It's really my identity I'm answering the question about. Not just Jesus' identity, but my own. Let's read Mark 8:31 through 33 together. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at the disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Now, this is the quickest fall from star pupil in the history of the world, right? Peter goes from, you are listening to God, you're hearing from God, and the very next thing that gets said to him is, you're speaking for the devil. That's kind of devastating as a student, right? You don't want to go from I'm star pupil to I'm speaking for the devil. But that's what happens with Peter. You didn't hear this from man. God had to tell you this himself. And then immediately you're speaking for the devil. You're talking, you're using the language of the devil. Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the God, the living one. Jesus says, now let me tell you a little bit about what that means. I'm going to suffer many things, going to be handed over, going to die. And Peter says, no. He rebukes him. He says, no, you can't do that. Now, what we have to remember, because it's easy to look at that and say, how dare he? How dare Peter say such a thing? How could he say that to Jesus? Jesus is in charge. Jesus is the Lord. How could Peter say to him, you're not going to die? You're not going to be handed over to the priest? How could that happen? But you have to remember the messianic expectation. At this time, what was it the disciples expected to happen? Why did they leave their homes? Why did they leave their families? Why did they leave their businesses? I don't believe they gave those up, and I think the text bears it out all through the Gospels. I don't think they did it to become missionaries. They did it to become revolutionaries. They thought they were following Jesus. They were following a king who was going to restore Israel, who was going to free them from the oppression of the Romans, and they were going to live differently. They thought they were on the way to a coronation, and Jesus has just told them, no, you're on your way to a crucifixion. That's what you're on your way to. So it's understandable that Peter would say, no, that's not why we left. That's not why the nets are back there laying by the boat. We didn't go for you to be killed and to suffer and to die. We didn't do that. But see, Peter has his agenda, and God has his own agenda. And Jesus is saying, that's Satan. Your agenda is Satan talking. It is not where we're headed. It's not what God wants. Emil Durkheim, the father of sociology, talked about a process called reification. And he said, oftentimes, what we do is we fashion a God that looks like us and who wants the same things we want, and then we worship that God. You ever been in that position where you sort of try to fit God into your box, try to make him what you want him to be, instead of him making you what he wants you to be? But that's the point of this. It's not about me shaping God into my image. It's about God shaping me into his image. Because when I answer the question daily, who do you say that I am? That impacts my image, not just who he is, but it impacts who I am. Second thing, it impacts the substance of my daily decisions. When I answer the question, who do you say that I am? It impacts the substance of my daily decisions. Let's read Mark 8:34 together. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. I think there are three orientations, three ways to live your life in reference to what's in charge and who's in charge. And the first one is this: life guided by desires. You can live your life guided by just what you want. It's whatever you want, whatever you desire. That's the foundational principle of your life. And the question when you live your life by desires is, what pleases me? What feels good? That's my question. What feels good to me? I have a vivid memory many years ago. Was at a state fair in Colorado, and there came this violent thunderstorm, lightning everywhere. It was just an amazing storm. And most of us were huddled under this tent watching this incredible light show. But I look outside, and there are actually people riding on the Ferris wheel during this lightning storm. I mean, they're going around and around, big smiles on their faces, right? Only it's not a Ferris wheel anymore. Now it's like some giant revolving lightning rod, right? It's become like a human rotisserie, wouldn't you say? That's what it is now. It's a human rotisserie. And so I'm thinking, this almost lends credence to the idea of natural selection, doesn't it? I mean, you think, these folks aren't long for this world because they just got to feel good so bad that they're riding a Ferris wheel in the middle of an electrical storm. But that's the way a lot of people live their lives, isn't it? It's just whatever I want, whatever I desire, whatever feels good to me. Okay, everyone, electrical storms, free Ferris wheel rides, right? Take this golf club and hold it up as you go around. That's the idea. But that's a pretty good picture of life in this first orientation. And this is where we're born. This is where we are when we're children. This is the 2-year-old orientation, where everything's just about what can I get and what do I want. I was in a supermarket one time, and I saw a mother. She had a baby in one of this little backpack. I love those things. Got the baby back behind her. And as she passes by, she has a sign taped on it that reads, "This child tends to shoplift. Please inform the mother." Right? I like that. That's a pretty good sign. Let us all know that baby's going to grab everything and get his hands on. But see, that's life at this level. That's what we're talking about. It's just all about, life is about getting whatever it is I want. Now, here's the sad thing. Many people never progress beyond this orientation toward life. It's always about what I desire. It's always that. Hugh Hefner, his philosophy, the Playboy philosophy, was, I reject any philosophy that says a man should deny himself for others. Every man ought to love himself preeminently and pursue his own pleasure constantly. Now, he doesn't say there anything you have to buy any magazines or anything. He just says you just have to live like you're a 2-year-old for your whole life. Isn't that what he's saying? You just have to live like you never become 3. You're always 2, and it's always about your desires and getting whatever you want. It revolves around me. Second orientation for life is life guided by conscience. It's life guided by conscience. And the question at this stage of life is, what is right? What is right? What's the right thing to do? Not what feels good, not what I want, but what is right? I read about a teacher who asked a student if they knew the difference between conscious and conscience, because kids have trouble with that, right? A conscious and conscience. And this child said, conscious is when you are aware of something, and conscience is when you wish you weren't. How about that? That's pretty good, huh? Conscious and conscious. But we start to live our lives in response to a moral imperative. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. And I understand that this society is breathless in its pursuit to convince everyone that there's absolutely nothing absolutely right or absolutely wrong, right? They want to tell you there is no absolutes, no moral absolutes at all. But everyone really knows deep down in their hearts there's some things that are always right? And there's some things that are always wrong. And when you live at this orientation, the what is right, the life guided by conscience, then you're asking yourself, what is right? What is the right thing to do? Not what do I want, not what do I desire, not what pleases me, but what is right. But there's a third level orientation for life, and this is where life really begins. This was the invitation when Jesus says, I give you life and I give you life abundantly. I'm going to invite you into something more powerful and beautiful and transforming than anything you could imagine. And this is what it is. It's this orientation. That is life guided by an intimate relationship with God. A life guided not even by what is right, but an intimate relationship with God and an unconditional surrender to His will for my life. So it's a life that is guided by this intimate daily walk with God, this intimate relationship, and an unconditional surrender. Whatever you want, you got. It's all about that, God. It's all about you getting what you want. And the question at this orientation of life is what pleases God. See, this is, I think, where the real adventure begins. What pleases you, God? Not just what pleases you generally. What pleases you right now? What pleases you right now, where I'm standing with these people at this time for your purpose? What do you want to see happen? And that's the orientation of life. That is the abundant life. Notice Jesus says to them, I'm calling you, and when I call you, you will deny yourself. And we oftentimes think, well, deny myself things, right? But you can deny yourself a lot of things and not deny yourself. Is that true? You can deny a lot of stuff and still not get to the heart of denying yourself. It's a fundamental reorientation of life when I begin to say no to what I want and I begin to say yes, 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 yes to everything that He wants. Life for me will no longer be a fulfillment of my own agenda, but it will be your agenda, God. And then look what He says next. He says, circle those words, take up His cross, right? Going to deny Himself, going to take up His cross. Now that was a vivid image in Jesus' day. Jesus' disciples had seen people carrying crosses. Don't you figure they had? They'd seen people do that. And they knew nobody ever picks one of those up unless someone's poking a spear at them, right? Unless someone's got a sword in their chest saying, pick it up, or else. You don't pick up a cross voluntarily. You don't do that because they'd watch people at the point of a spear carry a cross to the point of their execution. Now Jesus says, voluntarily choose to do what no person ever voluntarily chooses to do. choose to pick up what no one ever wants to pick up. Now, I think we misunderstand crosses. I think, because I hear people talk about, what's my cross to bear, right? And we talk about our burdens as crosses. It's like, well, I got a bad back, but that's just my cross to bear, right? Well, I lost my job, but that's just my cross to bear. Well, this thing happened. My house blew away in a tornado, which often happens around here, right? And that's just my cross to bear. But that's not a cross. See, Mark's writing primarily to the church in Rome, and the Roman church had burdens. They already had those. They had troubles. They got fired. They had problems in their families. They had burdens, and that's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about our burdens. He's talking about to carry a cross is to make a deliberate choice, to give up, to lose, to sacrifice for the sake of God's will in my life. That's what carrying a cross is. This is not that you have aches and pains. It's that you choose to give up, to sacrifice, to lose for the sake of the cross. And Luke's telling of this story says you take up your cross daily. You don't just you take up your cross every single day. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German churchman and theologian, and he was in Germany during the time of Hitler, and they asked him, why doesn't the church speak out against Adolf Hitler? He's slaughtering people. He's a maniac. Why won't the church speak out? And Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, it's because the church is afflicted by a terrible affliction, and it is what he called cheap grace. And he said it's grace without discipleship. It's grace without the cross, grace without Jesus living in my life and incarnate in my words and my actions. That's what it is. And he says what it does is it reduces Christianity to being called out of the world for a couple of hours a week. That's what he said. That's why the church doesn't do it, because we're just called out of the world a couple hours every week. Well, Jesus didn't die, so we could be called out of the world for a couple of hours every week in a Be Kind to God session. Jesus called us out that our lives might be transformed, that we might be shaped into his presence on this earth. So it's every day I'm moving beyond the narrow confines of my own life. I'm dying to my plans, my dreams, and my desires. And here's the beauty of it. And alive, living out his plans, God's dreams. That's what my life is supposed to be about. God's dreams coming true. His plans, his dreams, his desires. That's the point of it. So it shapes the substance. It impacts the substance of all my daily decisions. And it becoming the walking, talking representative of God's love and grace on this earth. That's what it's about, us being shaped into this force of heaven. Then number 3, the answer to that question impacts the significance of my life. So it impacts my identity, it impacts the substance of my daily decisions, and then finally impacts the significance of my life. Let's read the next passage together in Mark 8. For whosoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Notice that it says, whoever would want to save his life will lose it. Circle the word lose, because the word in Greek is apollumi, and it doesn't mean lose, it means utterly destroy it. We'll shred their lives. We'll destroy it. We'll obliterate their lives. It's a very powerful word. Whoever chooses to save their lives is going to blow it up, is going to destroy it, is going to trash it, is going to, whatever word you want to use, is going to devastate it. He's saying that if you hoard your life, if you think you can hold it for yourself, if you think you can live at this number one orientation where it's all about me, and you think you'll have anything, you won't, because you're going to obliterate your life if you do that. And if you give your life up, you give it away, then you will have it. Let's read 2 Peter 1:3 through 4, because I think this is a great statement of that very, very fact. His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through this he has given his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape from the corruption of the world caused by evil desires. You know, we might ask God for a lot of things. We might have been able to work up the gumption to ask for some things. We might say, save me from hell, God. Do that, please. Don't let me go and suffer eternally. We might have thought, I could ask that of God. I could imagine myself asking him that. We've all asked him that, right? We could all say, forgive us of our sins. We could all say, you know, God, bless my life, make things go smoothly. We ask that sort of stuff all the time. But who among us would have had the audacity to say, let me participate in your divine nature? Do you understand the impact of that? What Peter's saying here? That we will participate in the divine nature of God. I met a man, done 30 years of work in developing countries, doing international relief and development work and disasters and famines and wars and all sorts of stuff like that. And I met a guy in one of the biggest slums in Nigeria one time. He's living in this absolutely devastated place, just a horrible place. And not only does he live in one of the most squalid slums in the world, but he's got some real serious physical problems. And when I see him, the first time, he's in a wheelchair. He doesn't have the use of his arms or really any part of his body, and he's wrapped into this wheelchair with old inner tubes to keep him from sliding out. And when I see this guy in this wheelchair in the midst of this terrible slum, I'm there trying to help people start small businesses and things of that nature, see this guy in the street, and I notice that people are all around his wheelchair, and he seems to be praying for them. He's praying for all these people that have gathered around him in this slum. And I later meet him. His name is Isaac. He's a phenomenal person, just the most amazing person you could hope to meet. And I'm talking to him about how amazing it is that he's so full of joy and celebration and hope and everything wonderful and faith, and yet his life is so difficult, so terribly difficult. And he said to me, if you want to understand my life, don't look at this chair. Look at my heart, because I'm dancing on the inside. And he says, let me explain to you my life. Every day, the God who created the earth comes and finds me in this nowhere place and carries me out into the midst of people's trouble and loneliness and heartache and pain. And he loves those people through me. He touches their lives through me. He lifts their spirits through me. He says, you tell me who has a better life than I do. What? But it's true, right? No matter where we are, because we think, how is it that we've received everything we need? I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't have all these things. How is it that I've received everything that I need to participate in the divine nature, to be a part of God things every day? Well, look at Isaac. What has he got? Yet it's true for him too. He'd received everything he needed, and he carried that knowledge out, and he literally let God turn his little world upside down every day because he believed it. There was a boy who, after a sermon, maybe a long one like this, he was saying to his mom, the things the preacher said today confused me, which you may hear some of that today too. It's confused me. And mom said, well, what confused you? And the boy said, well, because the preacher said that God is bigger than us. And she said, oh, yes, he is bigger than us. He's so much bigger. He's bigger than all the universe. He spoke it into existence. He is definitely bigger than us. He said, but God also said that God is inside of us. And she said, oh, that's true. That's true. God is inside of us too. He's bigger than us, and he's inside of us. And he said, but I'm confused, because if God was bigger than us and God was inside of us, wouldn't he show through? Good question, right? Wouldn't he show through? Now, here's the thing for us, I think. Who do you say that I am? The impact of that question. See, I don't know what you have planned today. I don't know what you're planning to do. But nothing you have planned is anywhere near as important as the fact that the God of heaven show through you. That's the most important thing you have to do today. I don't care if you're going to leave here, get on a plane, fly to the Middle East, because the Palestinians and Israelis will only listen to you. You're the only one who can get them to shake hands and be nice. I don't care. That's not as important as God showing through you today, like he did through Isaac that day in the slum. I don't care if you're going to leave here and find the cure for cancer. That is not more important than the God of heaven shining through you today, that you participate in the divine nature. Here's the great news. That's just an ordinary day for God. That's just what he always had planned for you. That's just what he dreams for today, that you would let that happen.
Lord, let your light light up your face.